Right. Hello, everyone. Good morning from my side. I just want to quickly kick off with the house rules before we get this started. With me here today, I have my marketing team who I will ask to slip the slides left to right or forward or backwards. So, Christy, if you don't mind, quickly just the slide on house rules. Great, thank you. So just so we're all aware, the webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording will also be mailed to everyone afterwards. And just very importantly, please submit the questions via the Q&A button at the bottom. So it does go to our marketing team. And then all questions will be addressed during the Q&A at the end. Great. So I'd like to start off. Welcome everyone to Elasticito's latest webinar. My name is Gregor Prache. I am the Sales VP for DACH at Elasticito, and it's my great pleasure to be your host today. We are at a turning point in the industry. The regulatory landscape is shifting beneath our feet, and from the implementation of NIS2 in Europe to the UK's Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, it is clear that the focus has shifted. It is no longer just about whether you'll get breached, but how quickly you can recover, and importantly, how you prevent these incidents caused by internal errors. I am thrilled to be joined by two experts who help organizations adapt to these changes. I have David McCandless, Solutions Architect from Avia with us. He has nearly a decade of experience across the entire cloud ecosystem. He specializes in human-centric security and compliance. And with us here, Andrew Brown. He's the co-founder and CTO of Elasticito, with over 24 years of experience in cybersecurity, risk quantification, and GRC. His focus is on robust cloud security architecture. We've decided to join Avia and Elasticito on this webinar because we have a great partnership together. Our partnership is designed to solve the resilience gap we'll be discussing today. While Andrew provides the roadmap for GRC and risk quantification, David and Avia provide the automated engine that assesses, hardens, and monitors your tenant in real time. Together, we move organizations away from security by checklist and toward continuous reliance. Gentlemen, welcome. It's great to have you both here.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Gregor.
Great. I want to kick things off straight away. Christy, if you can just go to the next slide, please. Great. We've split this up in three parts, and we'll run through it as we go. David, right off the bat, can you give us a high-level overview of NIS2 and DORA, and what sets these regulations apart from previous ones?
Sure. If you just want to pull up the next slide. And the slide afterwards. So in terms of NIS2, NIS2 and DORA both, obviously, they're a set of EU directives and accompanying regulations. With NIS2, they're set up where they have their equivalent replicated in each region, in each country, in each jurisdiction. So, it's NIS2 is the EU directive, but each country will have their own corresponding set of regulations. Essentially, it'll be cybersecurity law, in whatever language, right? So in Belgium, it's CyberFun, which is probably my favorite. So, but yeah, they all have their equivalent. In terms of how it's changed since the original directive, so the original NIS was far more narrow. It had only 7 sectors that it considered essential services, and now with NIS2, that's heavily expanded that scope. So it now includes managed service providers, which is important specifically to our customers, and also the supply chain. If you're thinking about, it's not just your environment, not just your Microsoft tenant in this case, but the scope has certainly expanded. And the original NIS directive had more discretion in terms of the member state would decide, what qualifies as important, what are the limits, what kind of turnover, what kind of employee size. Whereas it's now in NIS2 that those thresholds have been stipulated explicitly. So there are qualifying amounts. If this many employees, if this amount of turnover, then NIS2 is going to apply. So as you can see on the slides here are just some of the sectors that qualify to see if your business is is going to be under NIS2. So NIS2 itself has a set of directives in various areas. Some apply specifically to 365 in terms of configuration, and some you can think about applying to 365 like as a platform, as a something that you report on. So if you maybe go forward 2 slides. Yeah, so here are the NIST security measures. So there's the reference, the directives themselves, and then there's supporting implementing regulations that come alongside. So there's the actual text of the security measures in the directives, and then there's a sort of those implementing regulations, which are given more explicit detail about how you implement that and what it looks like specifically in an environment, but they're not the actual sort of enforcement part of the regulation. So if we go back 1 slide, let's look about DORA then. We'll do the same. So in terms of DORA, it's not really replacing a direct predecessor, as in the case of NIS2, but a real patchwork of compliance frameworks. So EBA guidelines and EIOPA guidelines, from various industries. The idea that these have all been sort of amalgamated and made more explicit, and the scope is expanded in terms of who they apply to, and then more there's no like country equivalent of DORA, right? It's an explicit, like you're in the EU, you adopt the DORA framework, and you have to stay to the exact text of the regulation. So yeah, that's how this works. And then in terms of how it's changed, there's changes in things like resilience testing and penetration testing. The threat-led penetration testing is now a compulsory part of DORA. There's more specific guidelines. So if we go forward 1 slide. Yeah, that's the one. So yeah, there's more specific guidelines around exactly, you have to, within 4 hours, you have to classify the incident, you have to generate a report within 72 hours. So I appreciate there's a sort of lot of text here, but the idea is here that I've just mapped out each subcontrol and where OVIA as a platform can help support you in implementing this subcontrol and the relevant part of this framework, and then where Microsoft 365, like a configuration option, might be, something that's relevant. So, for the incident management process, there'll be parts of Microsoft 365 that will support. But further on, I'll go more explicitly on, exactly what recommendations can be, pushed into which area. Thanks, Gregor.
Perfect. Thank you. That was quite comprehensive, and we look forward to the rest of it. I just in the back of my head, I've got the Striker incident floating around that happened a couple of weeks ago, where valid admin tools were used to wipe out 200,000 devices. How has the scope of these mandates expanded?
Yeah, so like I say, the way that it's changed is really more explicit about incident notation. The 4 hours, the 72 hours. It's far the scope of who is responsible has expanded as well. So it's more of a sort of shared responsibility, and it really benefits those who treat like the entire system as something that needs hardening, rather than like a checklist and trying to hit a certain compliance framework or not.
Yeah, yep. Andrew, good time to bring you in here. The Striker breach highlighted how a single compromised admin could turn M365 into a weapon, basically wiping an entire global fleet. Under NIS2, the senior management now faces personal liability for such failures. How does this shift affect how boards prioritize security and budget for M365 today?
So I think we need to divide this into sort of a couple of categories. If we take the DORA side of it, so and look at what financial institutions are up to. Financial institutions are very good at working with regulatory frameworks. They understand that if they don't do it, they will get fines. And reason being is they've been down this road before, so they have all the mechanisms and the machinery in place. Okay, so they have very much. I've seen lots of questionnaires. I've seen huge quantities of work going on around DORA. So from a financial institution perspective, that's all done. That's prioritized. The boards are aware of it. Senior management's aware of it, and it's happening. If we get to NIS2 and the fact that the scope of NIS2 and the industries that have been included has now been expanded, we're seeing the same or a lot of the usual, okay? And that is there's a lot of wait and see. I'm not seeing a great sort of flurry. Certain industries are most certainly doing things in that regard, but we're waiting to see where the fines start appearing, okay? And there's quite a lot of well, I'm going to wait and see how rigorously this happens to be implemented. If we look at a number of governments, because NIS2 was a directive rather than a regulation, a lot of governments only just recently ended up enacting it. So we're not going to see fines coming in for another year, maybe even 18 months before this start to happen. And I think then we might see, some people starting to take it more seriously. But there's still very much, it's not going to happen to us type approach. And there's huge quantity of, I would say, ignorance in the market, which I think we'll highlight shortly, okay, where people just aren't aware of what the threat actor's up to and how easy or how they actually find their targets. So there's definitely a wait and see approach with a lot of what we're seeing with NIS too.
Perfect. 100%. Chris, you can just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Um, Quick run around about M365 gaps and the need for layering. Andrew, M365 is a core platform for many users. The Striker breach showed that attackers didn't even need malware. They just executed a remote wipe through Intune. Why is it often insufficient to rely solely on native features for DORA compliance? And secondly, where do you see the biggest blind spots?
So if we just move on to the next slide, let's look at we should have a nice pretty picture here. I'm using an open source intelligence tool here, and I'm looking at Striker. And what we find, and what is very visible to threat actors because they need know where to go and look, is they will go and do a bit of a dark web search. Now, if we move on to the next slide, okay, we will see data relating to what it is they're searching for. So on the next slide, we will see a list of stealer logs. Now, while this might to a lot of people look like, oh, I happen to have a username and password here, this is very different to elite credentials. Elite credentials are like when a company like a British Airways or a Marriott or Ticketmaster end up with a data breach and you end up with usernames and passwords out there and being shared and sold on Telegram channels. Stealer logs come from stealer malware, which is an entirely different exercise. It first really came to the fore when we ended up with the Ticketmaster data breach, and that became very relevant because the threat actors played a bit of a long game in this regard. They used all those personal email addresses to send out malware and go phishing. And what that did was it compromised a lot of personal devices or machines that are sitting, at home. And what they then gained access to, and I don't think they realized what they'd actually managed to do at the time, is they suddenly gained access to a lot of corporate logins. If we think back with COVID, a lot of people went to work from home. So there was a big shift across to Microsoft 365. A lot of people then sat there, and companies didn't have the ability to go and issue everybody with a notebook or a device. So people started using personal devices to work from home, and that sort of became the norm. Now, what happens is with stealer malware is when that personal device, and it's not in every instance it's personal device, but most cases it is, has been compromised with stealer malware, what you can then do is you can then gain access to a Microsoft 365 environment or a SaaS environment. Now, if we look at the dates of this, okay, yeah, they're from last year. But what this tells a threat actor when there happens to be stealer logs associated with an organization, it says that SaaS application is not locked down and confined to managed devices. We saw this in a number of compromises last year as well. It's been a definite shift over to this area. So this then means your threat actor can go phishing. And where do they go phishing? Well, it's quite easy to get personal email addresses off LinkedIn. And so they can target companies that they want if they realize that their infrastructure is not locked down. What do they end up doing? Compromising a personal device because it's not the person who's been security trained. It's not necessarily running the latest. It doesn't have the latest tools on it. And now what happens is they happen to have access into a Microsoft 365 tenant or other SaaS environment, okay? And here's where the problem comes in. It doesn't matter if you change the password. It doesn't matter if you've got 2FA in place, okay? Because the person just goes home, logs in again, they can grab the token, it's talking back to a command and control server, they still have full access to the environment. So it doesn't take them long to work out or find something that's misconfigured, try and do some privilege escalation, and once they get into something like Intune, okay, then what happens is they happen to have the ability to sit there and do what Intune was designed to do, which is manage devices. Okay, remove the data, and it depends how it's been set up. So that's exactly what happened in this case. So it was just a case that the threat actor went and did a search of, the dark web, came up, found this, said, oh, this is a good exercise. They might have tried a couple of other organizations beforehand, okay? But I find that there is very little awareness of this type of information that happens to be floating around and what it actually means.
Yeah, great point. David, to add some context here, the Striker issue wasn't about antivirus failure. It was about identity failure. And this leads us to identity threat detection and response. Why is having real-time identity context so critical for continuous compliance, rather than just ticking a static box for NIS2 or DORA?
Right. Yeah. So I think it's useful to think about that question in terms of the timeline of a breach, right? So there's two sides. There's left and right of the boom. So if you just move to the next slide. So there's left and right. So preventative measures, right? So this is the configuration that falls on the preventative side. So you can come into Microsoft Purview. If you have an E5 license, you can buy a regulation license to generate a sort of NIS2 report, and they'll give you these static recommendations about things that you can implement sort of point in time in your tenant. Or obviously, I'm biased. You can use a tool like Ovia, implement a recommendation through automation into your tenant, or multiple tenants at once. We don't have a license requirement there, and then we retest the environment. So basically, the idea is we want to make a change, and we want to make sure that no configuration changes are made in the tenant without consensus, without the proper change control process, or by a malicious actor. But if let's use MFA or access control specifically as an example. You just want to move to the next slide. Yeah, so NIS2 will in the text of NIS2 it'll say something like where appropriate, right? So the use of multi-factor authentication where appropriate, and then the implementation regulation guidance in the bottom left will be a little bit further. It'll say something like support evidence wherever possible, implement wherever possible. So there's always some sort of a wiggle room here in terms of what can you justify, how can you provide evidence that it is wherever possible, where it's not wherever possible. And every tenant, every business, there's business rules, there's context, there's no one size fits all really, and you can justify a lot of a lot of things, but it's proving that you've made the right trade-off in terms of security and usability. So, but the issue here is that your identity posture really isn't static, right? So even if you're confident that you've set up your tenant in a certain way that it's robust and it passes the audit, things change. So you get new users, you get new groups of users. Mature organizations, they have robust change control. So maybe the configuration, the conditional access policy, or whatever it is, doesn't change, but it doesn't need to for a new gap to be created here. So, if you have some idea about how you treat guests in your Microsoft tenant, for example, and then you have a new set of guests, right? So maybe you now put your content on the internet and allow people to register to access that content. And so even though the configuration, hasn't really changed in terms of, how you're treating guests, it should look very different now that your guests have changed in terms of who they are. They're not vetted users from, one of your supply chain, your partner organizations who the security posture of. So yeah, you can set it up and you can say, hey, point in time we made this decision and it was appropriate. But the problem is that things change over time. You need that sort of constant review. So that's why we're sort of generating this tool that helps look at that problem exactly. So we look at your tenant, we tell you, what the gaps are, what the gaps you are that have been created by you, and then you can sort of take them off and say, hey, we understand why this gap is here. That is appropriate because this is a decision that we've made about the configuration in our tenant. And then we're also building out some sort of sneak peek screenshots that you get here about our CAA tool, which allows you to fully visualize all the potential gaps in your tenant. We can suggest policies that will plug any gaps we see in your tenant. We can then simulate those policies on top of your Microsoft tenant and show you exactly what your new configuration will look like. We can send off some test authentications against this new tenant that you've hypothetically configured. So this basically to say that we see a lot of sort of expensive IAM security consultants out there specifically trying to harden like preventively before the boom and try and get your posture in the right place. But we think we can automate it and push it through a tool. But yeah, the other side of that, right, is the right of the boom is once the breach has already happened. So if you just want to go to the next slide. Yeah, so basically with ITDR, you need to understand what the identities are in your platform, right? Identity threat response, and then ideally you have an auto response pattern, an auto response set to that pattern of activity, right? So I mean, if you've seen any reporting about Claude Mythos, it depends, how much you believe that sort of stuff, but some of it's really yeah, the capabilities are improving so rapidly. And the shift is going to be not just from preventing attacks. If we get to the point where, Claude Mythos is churning out zero-day vulnerabilities, every single week, it's going to be around what are the patterns of activities that a compromised account takes in an environment, rather than making sure that, you're plugging everything and they can never get in. So in terms of what we do at Ovir, we create those alerts around those patterns of activity, right? So we see exactly what is happening in the tenant, what the identity is doing in terms of day to day. So you understand, if a user is not on a suspicious IP address, for example, but they just created a new hidden folder in their mailbox and started forwarding all their external emails to it, then that really, that needs your attention in terms of an ITDR perspective, and a tick box on a checklist isn't going to help with that. So you need to understand what people are doing in your tenant and respond to that.
No, 100%. I completely agree. And I think you've touched on the human side of cybersecurity. It's always the scary bit that you're not in control of what somebody does. And this brings me to our next question. If you look at a decision for someone to share data externally by a Microsoft tenant, why could a SharePoint sharing link be a major NIS2 compliance exposure?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of external data and sharing data, it's something that you have to be really conscious of. Data exfiltration is a massive potential risk here. So, I mean, the first thing you want to consider is just set some logic, some rules around making sure there's expiry dates on any sharing links that are generated in SharePoint, for example, so that you don't have access that you grant one day and then that gradually sort of increases over time without anyone actually reviewing it. You want to perhaps disable anonymous sharing links entirely in your tenant. And if a recipient has to authenticate to open a file, then you know who they are when they accessed it. So, guests should be required to have MFA, for example, before they access any of your tenant resources. So they're just a couple of the controls that sort of come to mind. But in terms of, it's that you have to know not only where your data is going, but the posture of where you're sending your data, and that not every organization can be the most strict in terms of those sort of controls. But yeah, you've got to make that choice consciously, and you've got to understand where your data is going.
Yeah, 100%. Andrew, any thoughts on that?
So, yeah, if we look at it, and we sort of move on to things like layered strategy and what we should be doing around this exercise, I always turn around and say to organizations, start off by understanding what a threat actor might know about yourself, okay? Look at the open source intelligence. They don't come across you by accident. They're in the money-making business, even if they happen to be a nation state type threat actor. They're going to be sitting and looking for using search tools to be able to find targets. Okay, so this is the opposite to marketing. Take yourself off the actual, radar. Okay, make yourself invisible. But then when we look at, this layered type strategy around what you should be doing in this regard, you might be using a compliance tool. A compliance tool is going to say, well, do I have MFA in place? Do I have a password in this regard? Where we look at tools like Avira and where that comes in place is you can have policies in place in Microsoft 365, but they might not necessarily be enforced. Okay. So in which case we put a nice little tick in the box that says we have a policy. Okay. But is that policy actually working? Did we check it? Have we verified it? Okay. And we get organizational drift happening. So if we look at it, IT does an amazing job of enabling business. Okay. Cyber has the job of sort of having to try and police this. Okay. Which then leads you to the situation where new features are introduced. There's change in what your threat actor's up to. And in the cyberspace, there's just way too much going on. Okay. And that's where specialist tools like this come in because they're going to sit there and you're going to see new things pop up, new alerts that are going to come along. Okay. So IT should really see this as, help and guidance around misconfigurations and the fact of change that is taking place. And cyber should see this from, or the CISO should see this from the point of view of this is a super useful, helpful tool to ensure continued compliance, but also to help with resilience for when new features, functionality, and changes start taking place.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with you there. Um, I want to quickly touch on data sovereignty. How can organizations implement advanced security measures like strong authentication for external recipients while still maintaining control over their data, especially if their internal systems might be offline? I think, David, if you can answer this, will be great.
Yeah, so I mean, what you want to do is understand what you're trying to achieve. Like, what is your what is your data? Where is it stored? What access control sits in front of that data? So yeah, I mean, in terms of 365 specifically, it would be conditional access policies, right? But you want to understand exactly what those conditional access policies are trying to achieve, and what are the potential gaps that are being sort of introduced. So for example, we frequently see there'll be policies where people are still using printers or meeting room devices that's still
Yeah,
using basic authentication, right? They're not they're adding in exceptions for these devices or these legacy authentication methods into their environment, and it's a justification that you need to have that you're introducing these gaps knowingly. But what we see frequently is that those gaps introduced are just too big. So they'll make an exception for a meeting room device, but that device should only ever be using Teams, for example. But
yeah,
the way that they'll set up their policy is that they'll make an exception for this device, but it can be for any 365 application, right? So ideally, you want to lock it down. You want to understand, what kind of when you're implementing these measures, you want to understand the gaps that you're creating with exceptions and business rules, and then really plugging those in. So in that case specifically, you want another policy that blocks that device from accessing anything apart from Teams, for example. So you want to sort of fit them
mhm,
together. And the idea is that anytime you introduce a gap in your security posture, or you make an exception, you understand why you've made that and sort of had a justification for that.
perfect. Christy, can we just go to the next slide if you don't mind? Thank you. Um, so
So I think I've jumped in here a little early, and I
You
got
did, but
into
that's not a problem at all. So I
I
think
so
you.
apologize for mucking the slides up and getting everything out of order here.
It's all right. It's okay. We're not live, so it doesn't really matter. As it is, anything live, things change and happens, and we just roll with this. But I think it's a good part because you did answer the question I was going to ask you on this slide. But as how do you help organizations build resilience security architectures? You've touched a bit about it. How do you enhance the M365 suite from Elasticito point of view?
So if we look at, what we're doing in this, okay, we've developed some additional tools to take this even further and that plug on the top of M365 and OVIA. And what we've done is we've developed a complete M365 threat model around that, but also I think where this is moving very quickly is being able to sit here and ask questions on the fly of various components. So we started taking Claude, and the reason we're using Claude is because of the ability to handle multiple APIs and all of the different API endpoints, whereas the rest of them can't do that. And this enables us to do things like plug into M365 or in this case Avia, and we can start asking questions, just simple questions. Okay. Do I have MFA enabled across and enforced across my entire environment? And it goes away and it look at that and it comes back and it actually answers your question. So this taking this to another level, okay, and utilizing AI and plugging AI into this, as long as you've obeyed the rules as to what you're actually doing and you've secured it and you haven't, we haven't introduced another layer of authentication issues, okay, around this, you suddenly start ending up with some really powerful tools.
Great. I want to move on to my next question. Highlights more third-party risk in the UK bill. Um, David, this one's for you. With DORA and the new UK cybersecurity and resilience bill putting heavy regulations on the supply chain, what should organizations demand from the MSPs to prevent from becoming a backdoor in a scenario like Striker?
Yeah, so in terms of what you want from your MSPs and what you want from others in your supply chain, really you need to understand their cyber risk management program. Really, you want to understand who are the responsible parties on their side, their service standards. You know, what are they compliant with various frameworks? You want to understand the frequency of their audit. So there's obviously the standard questions that you send over in the question and the survey. But I think in terms of being really diligent, you want to ask more open-ended questions like about their posture, right? So questions like, what's the longest period of time that there was an undetected breach or one of your services were unavailable? Tell me about that. What was the after action? What was the root cause analysis there? How have your procedures changed? And you want to know really, are they evolving, right? Are they changing? Because the way that the landscape is shifting just so quickly, it's really important that they're really on top of how things are changing, right? So, and also, what kind of automation, what kind of a continuous ongoing monitoring and assessments do they have? Above and beyond these scheduled audits, understand how they think about their posture. And of course, there's the very explicit things, right? In the contracts, you should say some specific rights. You want audit rights, you want exit rights, you want data portability. You need, in general, you just want to be able to be as flexible and as agile as possible, really. So you want to maintain that freedom, the flexibility, and you need to be able to adapt to changing regulations and business requirements. And you should for sure require that of your MSPs, your supply chain, who you're working with day to day.
Thanks. Andrew, as we shift towards continuous compliance, how can organizations leverage tools like Microsoft Sentinel along with specialized security solutions to transition from episodic point-in-time audits to state of perpetual readiness?
So that's super interesting. if we look at it, okay, organizations have been, brought up on things like annual audits, okay, be it with internal or something like ISO 27001 or SOC 2. And so every year they get prepared for those type of audits and they make everything in line. If we look at DORA and NIS2 and the new UK regulations that are coming in, what the regulators basically wanting everybody to do is to be in a continuous state of readiness, not prepare for this once a year. So, should you end up stating or having a breach or a cyber instance, the regulator is basically coming along and saying, right, I want to see that you happen to be compliant at that moment in time, which could be a struggle for a lot of organizations. How do you prove that you were in compliance? I know the other day I did on one of our test environments, I went and because I needed to add another user and they'd forgotten to sit there and enable their 2FA, I went and turned off the 2FA for a minute or two while they got back in. When I turned back on the 2FA in that tenant, what happened is it actually changed the settings and I didn't notice it. It only came to my attention about a week later when someone else was getting there and said they'd managed to actually do something and receive an SMS as part of their 2FA, which is, what we didn't want. So that just illustrates the point that it's very easy for things to change and for you to go out of compliance with your policy or what you're actually achieving just by sitting and doing various items. So when you look at tools like Avaya that plug into your Microsoft 365 environment, I would have automatically received an alert in that regard that there had been a change to the status of our 2FA policy. It was no longer in compliance. But also what happens is I might not have the budget or the ability to go and have a SOC or a full-time SOC or even a managed outsourced SOC that is busy looking at my logs and my instance and everything through something like Microsoft 365. Plugging in specialized tools like Avaya enables us to get a managed SOC. And instead of trying to do a DIY on Microsoft Sentinel, if you were to look at using Microsoft Sentinel or doing those type of things, while the tool might be free, actually making use of it and setting up your own SOC or SOAR capabilities is a huge investment. So you can take tools like this, utilize them, and be able to quite easily prove your continuous compliance because you can look back in history, you can demonstrate that you're measuring it, okay, and that you're getting weekly reporting and that you were in compliance and you have done your best efforts. Again, when new functions and features are added, you rely on the fact that Avaya is going to be on top of that, okay, and introduce them and bring those to your attention so you're not going to miss those over a period of time.
No, 100%. Um, Reflecting on the lessons from the past, what would you say is the single most critical cultural shift or process needed for organizations to sustain compliance in the long term?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I try and tackle that first. So I think in general, technology really can reduce risk, but it can't eliminate it completely. And the most important thing is the security culture, right? That's something that technology integrates with, but it doesn't replace it completely. So the organizations that are going to struggle most in this area is where security, cybersecurity, and IT is sort of siloed off in its own area, right? It's treated as an IT problem, it's treated as a CISO problem rather than a real responsibility for the full organization, right? So that shift that you need to make is the security behaviors by everyone need to be visible. It needs to be from the top down, right? So if the CEO or the CFO is forwarding, spreadsheets to their personal Gmail because it's convenient for them, then that's just, and it's not called out, it's not tracked, then that just undermines all those, those cybersecurity training programs or all the messaging that you can do. So essentially, it has to start with leadership and it has to be about culture for sure. So yeah, in terms of practically what that looks like, you want continuous role-specific security education, right? So not just a tick box and annual. and you need those contextual nudges around what's happening in terms of risky behavior, which you could use platform like Ovir to see, who's sharing these files externally, what's happening, who's doing this. And then second, you need just a clear policy that's consistently enforced. And then third, we want like a safety net, psychological safety net around reporting near misses and mistakes. There needs to be a positive response to sort of owning up and understanding exactly what happened. And the incidents that you never hear about are the ones that become breaches, right? So the security culture needs to be open and honest. It doesn't need to be a sort of tick boss, but yeah, I mean, even incentivize over-reporting, tiny discrepancies. Obviously, it's a balance here, but it's easier to sort of pull back from being too sort of explicit and open than it is to start with. Well, everyone, well, it just works. It just, who cares as long as it works. You
Yeah,
can't get to that place.
100%. Andrew, your
Andrew?
thoughts?
Yeah, so absolutely. It's really about doing things like gap analysis and understanding what happens in your environment. And I think this is just such a vast area, and it's something that, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger each and every day. And in which case, you need your specialized tools, okay, to be able to help you understand all of the moving parts. And the more you can do this, the better and the more resilient you're going to be.
Perfect. 100% agree. I think this is a good point to do some questions. We've got a couple of questions from the audience, and then we'll see. We're also running nicely on time, so let's jump into those. The first one we have over here is our team is quite small, 45 users. How would we be able to manage another platform? And is it expensive?
Yeah,
So I
so
think
well,
should I grab that from the
yeah,
MSSP
why not?
side of it? Okay. This is where, something like our team comes in as Elasticito, and that is we would be able to do that for you. It's very inexpensive. Okay. You just want to know that you've got a secure Microsoft 365 environment. We would charge you a small monthly fee to actually do this and ensure that your Microsoft 365 environment is secure. And we can either provide you periodic alerts if you're interested in those, or a monthly report specific to your organization. So we have the ability to completely tailor these reports, and it will give you both a technical and, if you want a board type report, on a monthly basis, we can produce those as well. It's very simple for us to do that reporting.
Yeah, and from an OVA perspective, it depends if you're talking specifically about OVA, but we're sort of built as an operational layer that sits on 365, right? So in a sense, it's far easier to manage 365 through our platform than it is to do it yourself the current way. So the idea is that we frequently run not just the ITDR piece and the monitoring, but we run a scan like an assessment of your tenant, and then we're running that each day and telling you we're generating tasks for you to go and sort of address, right? So we'll say, hey, since the last time that we ran a scan, there's now 3 users that are classified as dormant, right? We haven't seen them logging in for the last 90 days. This is the next thing that you should do in Microsoft, right? So we sit like as an operational layer. Obviously, we're really helpful in terms of compliance, which is this specific webinar. But yeah, and it's the billing is also per user, right? Because it's proportional to the amount of identities on the platform, who's doing what, the amount of metadata that we get about them. So yeah, it's a per user billing model. So yeah, with a team of 45, really over here is ideal, and it'll save you time as well. It makes sure it basically points you and says, hey, this is the next thing that you need to do in
Yeah,
Microsoft. So as a platform, it really suits that use case.
great. Here's a good question. I think it's a question that we can discuss for quite some time, but it's one that pops up quite often. It's the question is we have Microsoft E5 and a dedicated security team, including a SOC. Aren't the inherent controls in Microsoft good enough?
Sure. I mean,
That's a little bit of a loaded question without upsetting Microsoft here. David's going to answer this one.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft is a hugely varied platform. It's a massive platform. I don't know if you've seen the recent Gartner presentation, but there were about 90 or so slides, and there was just one slide alone had about 50 or 60 areas that in Microsoft that need to be managed. There, you can think about them as potential gaps, but it's Purview, it's SharePoint, it's Exchange, it's OneDrive, it's Outlook. So in terms of I would say potentially, but the chance that you're actually fully utilizing all the inherent controls that Microsoft gives to you, I think is we almost never see it. So from the first perspective, it's like, are you actually fully utilizing what you're paying for? Do you know the full potential of how it could be implemented in terms of and OVIR is designed to sort of give you visibility around that. It's also the operational layer, right? The prioritization piece. As I say, Microsoft is so massive and expansive. It's like, do you know what you should be doing? Do you know what's important? Where you're getting your sort of most bang for the buck, so to speak. So yeah, it's around knowing what to do next, and then it's reporting. It's showing what has been done in the last month. It's showing the value. It's generating a report that you can send to the executive summary that you can send to a relevant stakeholder, right? It's the whole operation. It's understanding exactly what there is, the scope of what you need to implement and understand. That's where I'd see it from my perspective.
I think if I could add to that, while you might have a SOC and an E5 license, it's a case of would you get a either internal or external party to audit that on a regular basis? And if the answer to that question is yes, okay, which is probably best practice from a compliance perspective, then you're going to sit there and benefit greatly from Avaya because it's like having that external auditor continually plugged in. And what you're able to do is it demonstrates your compliance every moment of the day. It'll notify you the moment you go out of compliance, or something changes in your environment or something new gets added. And with what we have and what we're able to plug in, you can ask it questions at any point in time. So, to a large extent, it basically negates the need to keep having auditors or expensive resource go through it and check whether you're actually, in compliance and you've implemented best practice. So that's really the big benefit you get out the tool.
Definitely. Another question over here. It's probably more for David. How does Ovia provide a legally defensible paper trail that proves that our leadership exercised due diligence rather than just processing the Microsoft E5 license?
Yeah, so how Avaya works is that you plug your tenant in and we make a set of security recommendations about things. We look at your current posture of your tenant and then we compare it against various areas and the recommendations in these areas. So each of those recommendations will have an accompanying Microsoft license tier that is required to implement that certain change in the tenant. And then we have two modes, right? So we can do a monitor mode where we say this is what the configuration should be to be in compliance with this framework. OVIR can look at the tenant and say, does it line up or not? Or you can use OVIR as a platform to enforce and programmatically like push that value into the tenant and prove that it's being compliant over time. And then you can see every time OVIR syncs, it connects as what's called an enterprise application that connects into the Microsoft tenant. It frequently syncs and says, hey, this is the configuration in time. These are the settings that have been configured. And then it gives you the output of, hey, at this time, this one was changed by this person. And you can, if it's in force mode, OVIR will overwrite that back and say, no, we know this is the agreed upon consensus. So you've got like that ongoing report that's done that shows you, hey, this is the posture at this point in time, but also if it's changed, what was changed, and then if it was reverted automatically by OVIR. And then you can produce like you can set up a template that specific to a specific compliance framework with a set of recommendations that will cover those sub controls and map that over and say, hey, these are the sub controls. This is what this is what this DORA sub control refers to. This is the cybersecurity, like you have to have the most up-to-date Windows Defender signatures, for example. And OVIR will look at your tenant, look at your configuration and say, hey, do you have an Intune policy that has your Windows Defender updates signatures, up to date? And that's you can say yes, and you can generate a report on that.
Perfect. Questions are flying in quick and fast now, so let's try and get through them. Um, does it do automated evidence collection that can be exported directly from NIS2 auditors? I
Yeah,
think that's more.
so
Go for
yeah,
it, sorry.
I'll go ahead. Yeah, so in terms of how you do this, yeah, you can set up what we call a policy template. So you set up a template that has a list of policies that would be, in this case, the ones that are specific to NIS2. We tag them with the attached framework, and where a relevant framework maps onto one of the policies, and then you test that template, that NIS2 template in this example, to check its alignment against a tenant. And you can also do that to multiple tenants at once. So, if you're a managed service provider, an MSP, you can set up templates and do that alignment. So there's the concept of alignment towards a like NIS2 towards a compliance framework, and then you can also see between tenants and make sure they're all aligned with each other in terms of them being in parallel, and see how they change over time. But then there's also over here, like as a platform, right? It's an independent tool that is reviewing your security posture over time. So there's the specific recommendations. Do you have them in your tenant? And there's also, are you using OVIR as sort of as a platform to help sort of satisfy some of the sub controls? And we have like a full spreadsheet with a mapping of exactly how OVIR works and fulfills those requirements from those perspectives. So there's the two parts. There's the actual configuration of your 365 tenant, and then there's how your processes, your surrounding processes, your how often your reviews are happening, that sort of thing. And that's not something that you can you sort of say, hey, this is what we're doing at the moment. That needs to be reporting. You need to have an evidence trail. You need to show, hey, we reported this. We generated this report at this date, and this person reviewed it, for example. And OVIR can be used to do that.
Perfect. I think one quick last little question, and then we're going to wrap because we're running out of time here. I quickly just want to fetch it. Simple one. Is there a max number of users?
Yeah, for OVIR as a platform, there's not a maximum number of users. So the way it works is that you have what we call an organization, and you plug a tenant into that organization, and then we monitor the activity, the metadata from an ITDR perspective of all the users that are connected into your tenant. So you can think about that's going to include guest users, it's going to include shared mailboxes, it's going to include all the identities, even agentic identities, depending on how far you are down that route. But yeah, the idea is that OVIR as a platform, you add as many administrators as you like. We charge on the amount of users that we're monitoring in terms of their activity and their patterns of activity. So you don't have to think about it in terms of like number of seats, how many analysts are able to use the platform. It's more like the Microsoft tenant, how many identities are present in the Microsoft tenant, and we only charge based on identities with a premium Microsoft license attached to them. So if you have 500 total because you've got guest users, you've got service accounts, for example, we're only going to charge based on the premium identities. So you can use, obviously, in this case, you can use OVIR in terms of compliance as a tenant configuration platform, but the ITDR piece is proportional to the amount of users, and that's what we charge off. And that means there's no back and forth with like, hey, we're going to be adding a new technician, we're going to be adding a new 100 users. We just look at your users list, how many identities that we've tracked the activities of that have a Microsoft license, a premium Microsoft license attached, and that's how it's calculated. So there's no back and forth there, and it makes it very flexible in terms of how big your tenant is, changes over time, merging with another company, bringing the tenants together, all those sorts of activities. There's no
Yeah.
back and forth.
Gentlemen, we're out of time, so I think we smashed through this. There's been quite a few valuable insights. There's a couple of questions still here. Thank you for those. I will get our panel to answer them, and we will send them to you directly. But for now, I just want to say thank you so much to David and Andrew for sharing your insights and your time today. It's clear that achieving continuous compliance is possible, but it requires a strategic approach that balances technology and the human element. For everyone watching, we've shared the resources for OVIR and Elasticseso. And if you would like to begin your compliance journey with us, you can find me on LinkedIn, you can pop me a mail. I'm happy to help. So from me, Gregor Prache, it's goodbye, and thank you for joining today.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.